Welcome back, adventurers, to Let's Play Riven, the sequel to Myst. When last we left off, we'd managed to make it to Riven. Unfortunately, we were captured by a guard in a steel cage. We were in the steel cage, not the guard, but fortunately, he was knocked out by a mysterious man in a strange kind of garb, and we were freed from the cage. The bad news is that said person also decided to abscond with the prison book that we need to capture Gehn, the foe that Atrus is currently fighting and who has Catherine, Atrus' wife, as a hostage. But before we do anything at the moment, I'm going to have a look at this journal that Atrus so thoughtfully provided for us in order to kind of get our bearings here in Riven. Now, as you all know, Atrus' journals are actually quite very useful in sort of explaining what it is we're supposed to be doing and why all this has come about. It's a rather dusty old journal as opposed to all the other ones, which are much nicer. But at least the guard didn't get it, which is good. And they appear to have dates in the margin. There appear to be dates in the margins of each entry this time, which weren't on the journals on Myst library, to be sure. But it's a nice change. 87.6.10. They held for more than 30 years, but the corrections I made to Riven have finally failed. The island has resumed the familiar pattern of decay that is the hallmark of my father's work. I must now race to implement this new patch before it's too late. I only hope that my revised theories are sound. Ah, that's very interesting. So Atrus' father wrote the Riven descriptive book. So he was the one who created the link to Riven. Previously, the only mention of Atrus' father was in the Stoneship Age book. As being the man that taught Atrus the art of creating links to other worlds. 87.6.16. Revisions to Riven completed. There are a number of minor adjustments which need to be made, but the basic corrections have been entered and working. Something's not right. I've been monitoring the instruments for several hours now, but have thus far observed no change. It's possible that I've made an error, though I've checked my entry against my pre-notation and can find no discrepancy. I've not had a rest in nearly 3 days, so it may be that I'm just not seeing it. If the fault is with my foundational assumptions, however, perhaps after a short rest I will see something. These two entries right here basically give us the reason why Atrus was writing in the Riven descriptive book when we first encountered him. That is because the age of Riven is inherently unstable due to the rather eclectic style of writing that Atrus' father has, apparently. Apparently each of Atrus' fathers, this is typical of pretty much most of the ages that Atrus' father worked on. But it also means that our fate, and the fate of everyone on Riven, essentially lies in Atrus' hands. This also explains why Atrus was, fairly concerned upon returning to Dunny after dispensing justice upon Ceres and Akana. He did mention that its long delay may have already had a catastrophic impact on the world in which Catherine was now being held hostage. Anyway, let's check the next entry. 87.6.18. Success. It appears that my repairs have been effective after all. The gateway image has become noticeably clearer, and although it is impossible to know this with absolute certainty, the island seems to have quieted itself. Just a few more weeks of work, and I shall be free at last to go there myself and attempt to bring Catherine back. The past 8 months have left me little time to think, to devise a strategy for getting her out of there. I've received no sign from her in all that time. I'm afraid that... No, I must assume that she is all right, lest my fears undermine my efforts to bring her back. This is actually quite ominous indeed, because apparently Cirrus and Achenar managed to... The way that Cirrus and Achenar tricked Catherine into Riven was by saying that Atrus had gone there with a linking book. You may remember Atrus had a mention of that he couldn't supply us with a linking book, because although linking books are useful in getting us back, we can't bring the linking book with us once we link through, which means that anyone else can potentially use the linking book. This would also explain why Atrus created the red and blue books in order to trap people in the fears that someone rather malevolent and untoward may have inadvertently gained access to the Myst book that fell through the star fissure. Fortunately, we had the Myst book, so, that fear was allayed, so that's good news. 87.6.19. I did not create the Age of Riven. Unlike my father, I have never presumed to have such power, and yet the future of all those who live there has fallen into my hands. So far I've managed to read the page before it turns. The island continues to appear stable, and I would like to believe that I have saved a dying world. But the theories of one individual cannot support the lives of real people indefinitely. I must get everyone off of Riven as soon as possible. The problem now is Gehn. I'll never be able to rescue Catherine and relocate the island as if he is still the man he once was. I haven't seen him in over 30 years, but his history forces me to assume that he is still a threat. His myopic mission to restore the Dunny civilization has left too many innocent cultures dying in its wake, and would continue to do so, were he to once again be free of the confines of Riven, or the Fifth Age, as he coldly titled it. The universe has been saved from Myst's corruptive influence for the last 33 years because no one has been able to leave that age, the last linking book out of Riven having been lost in the star fissure upon my return to Myst. That was my intention, to maroon my father on Riven by removing all the existing links to other worlds, and since the art of constructing books had long been lost with the fall of the Dunny, he would be trapped there for the remainder of his lifetime and effectively segregated from countless other worlds that he would have invaded. This is truly dire ramifications indeed. So Gehn, the mysterious foe that Atrus is currently fighting against, and Atrus's father, the man that taught Atrus about the art of linking to other worlds, are one and the same. They are the same person. Gehn is Atrus's father, pretty much. Which is a bit of a shock to the system. We thought Atrus's sons were terrible enough. They got greedy and possessive of the power of the ages of Myst, and the inhabitants and the civilizations and whatnot. But Atrus's own father, who believes in his mind that he is creating the worlds, the ages described in the books, rather than building links to them. So effectively he has some kind of twisted God-savior complex, because apparently he's on a mad quest to restore the fallen Dunny civilization, Dunny being the age in which Atrus is currently, writing in the Riven book at the moment. Gehn is actually a descendant, which would also make Atrus another descendant of the Dani civilization. This can actually be further explained in the Myst novels, the Book of Tiana, which describes the fall of Dani, both the city and the civilization, and also gives a bit of backstory on Gehn. But most importantly, the first Myst novel, the Book of Atrus, was actually written and published in between Myst and Riven. So the Book of Atrus actually predates Riven, the sequel to Myst, and it fleshes out the kind of relationship between Atrus and Gehn, and it also kind of shows a little bit more of Riven. How Atrus ended, and all that stuff. So I won't spoil all that here, although it's pretty much summarized in this journal. But if you can read them, if you are able to read the Myst novels, which are the Book of Atrus, the Book of Tiana, and the Book of Dani, I suggest you do so because they're really well done. Let's keep reading. In effect, that is what we achieved, but the way it fell, however, was no one's ideal. Though the sting of the incident has gradually faded from my memory, the deep pain of what actually came to be has never left me. At the time it all seemed so clear. Gehn's destructive path could not be allowed to continue. But it was never my choice that the innocent inhabitants of Riven, who has already suffered so much, would be the ones to pay for it. Enough. To dwell in the past is to die in the present. The situation is not the same as it was then. The knowledge I've acquired in the years since that time has yet to be applied to this problem. Basically, this entry is pretty much a summary of the events that take place towards the end of the Book of Atrus. Again, go read it if you want more, to know the full story of what happened between Atrus and Gehn. 87.6.20. I think I have the solution. Why it did not occur to me sooner, I do not know, unless the idea of it had been pushed out with the thought of my sons. A prison book. Many years ago, during a hunting expedition through the ruins of Dani, I chanced upon a formula for a most unusual type of book. Unfortunately, due to the fact that my father was then in the habit of confiscating my discoveries, I was forced to leave it behind. Years later, however, as part of my efforts to protect the vulnerable worlds linked to the books in my library, I was pleased to find that I could still recall most of the formula, and with little experimentation quickly succeeded in creating one of these devices myself. The procedure is actually quite simple. By altering key lines of text but slightly, a normal linking book's connection can be partially severed, such that anyone who attempts to use the book will be permanently trapped in the dark void of the link. That is, unless someone else then uses the book, at which point that person would become trapped and the first person displaced back into the world. The technique can be applied to books that have already been written, changes to the original text being so slight that anyone who is unfamiliar with the code will be unable to detect them. If indeed my father is not changed, what better bait could there be than a book that appeared to be a link back here to Dani? So now we know the fundamentals behind the linking book, or the prison book. And this apparently, ultimately what inspired the infamous Red and Blue books, the prison books stored on the Myst library to keep out unwary explorers, and which, ironically enough, Cirrus and Aknar themselves ended up trapped into each of the books because they believed that they were ages of unfathomable power and influence, when in fact they were actually prisons. 87.7.2 Trouble. My nightly analysis of the island's condition has revealed that the tremors have begun again. The pattern, however, is new. The disturbances are the result of the changes I have made. This did not at first concern me, however. Tremors of this type were always one of the possible side effects that I had anticipated during this initial phase of the island's readjustment. Still, in order to verify my assumptions, I decided to calculate again, incorporating the new data. The results were not what I expected. The damage to the understructure is more extensive than I'd realized. I could no longer go to Riven as planned. Catherine, forgive me. 87.7.3. I must act while I still have the time. The signs are barely visible, but there is no question that the island's deterioration is accelerating. Total collapse is imminent, unless I can keep ahead, and that is becoming increasingly difficult to do. As I mentioned before, the only thing that is currently keeping us alive at the moment is Atrus, continually writing, phrases that will temporarily stabilize the age of Riven, but won't hold it together forever. 87.7.5. With every passing moment, I gain a clearer picture of the incredible chaos that my father's economy of words has yielded, but it is a dismaying process. The complexity of the problem is overwhelming. There is no end to this. The last few days have all but convinced me that the collapse of Riven is inevitable, and that at best I can only strive to delay it now, and that at some point the island will become stable enough to risk a rescue attempt. 87.7.7. I think I've come up with a way to subdue the tremors. It will require my attention for at least a month or two, so it may be necessary to discontinue these journal entries for a while. 87.7.13. Something truly miraculous has happened. Beyond all conceivable probability, someone has finally found my lost Myst linking book and has freed me from this prison. I immediately realized that this could be the solution to my dilemma, and I believe my mysterious benefactor is willing to assist me. I'm still not sure it can work. The logistics of such a scheme are formidable, but the mere fact that it may now be possible for me to continue my repairs to Riven, and yet proceed with my original intent to find Catherine, has given me renewed hope. So that entry is basically a summary of, when we stumbled upon the green book in the fireplace on Myst, which led to Dunny, and because we were smart in bringing the missing page from Atrus's own mislinking book that was sabotaged by Aknar, which was why he was essentially trapped in the prison chamber on Dunny. If we hadn't done that, then both of us would have been trapped in Dunny, and we wouldn't be able to get back to Myst. But since we did that, it ultimately led us to the current situation on Riven. 87.7.16. The last few days have left me little time to work out the remaining problems with sending someone else to Riven. It did occur to me, however, that if a way could be found to signal me once Atrus had been... What? Atrus? Gehn! Once Gehn had been captured, it would no longer be necessary to take a real linking book to Riven and risk the possibility of inadvertently releasing Gehn. The deteriorated state of the gateway image makes the use of a visual signal impossible, but the picture remains a reliable indicator of Riven's condition nonetheless. By measuring and interpreting variations in the noise patterns, I am still able to observe basic changes that occur in the age, even though I cannot see them. The problem is that my instruments can only detect changes that occur on a fundamental level, and it seems unlikely that an individual could effect such an elementary change from within an age. The idea may be foolish. Still, there is a known weakness that may be worth investigating, an anomaly that appears as a rift between two separate systems, the star fissure. But how, or even if this fact could be exploited, I cannot say. Sending someone to Riven also means that once I received the signal that they were ready to return, I would have to leave my writing in order to take a real linking book there myself. However, provided my father was safely out of the way, this should take very little time. After that, assuming that the island does not incur much damage in my absence, it should then be a relatively simple matter to hold it together long enough for Catherine to return to Riven and evacuate the remaining islanders. Predetermining a signal without knowing the topography of the island may prove to be impossible, but I am afraid there can be only one answer to the question of whether or not I should send my friend to Riven with a way out. The potential for failure will be greatly diminished if the prison book that is all that is taken there. I'm sure my father is expecting me to bring a linking book to Riven. May he not be disappointed. That was one of the many questions that I had about our current operation to rescue Catherine. Because before we linked through, Atrus said something about signaling him after we've rescued Catherine. And in the journal he mentions possibly using the star fissure, the strange phenomenon that Atrus used to escape from Gehn, and through which allowed the Myst linking book that he used, or the Myst descriptive book, I should say, to fall into our hands inadvertently. So the star fissure itself is actually on Riven, something that is actually, one of the many spoilers, well, not quite a spoiler for the Book of Atrus, because that's pretty much how the story ends. And he also mentions temporarily linking, once he does arrive and Catherine is back, possibly linking back to, once the two of them are safe, linking back to Dunny in order to keep Riven from falling apart further, and ultimately sending Catherine back to be able to save the other people, the other inhabitants of Riven. So yeah, we're actually, that's the difference between, that Riven has from Myst. An entire civilization, an entire culture is on our shoulders. We're not just here to save Catherine, we are here to save the whole people of Riven. But before we can save the people of Riven and also rescue Catherine, we must first trap Gehn in the prison book. The prison book that was taken from us by the Mr. Mystery Man, whoever he was. So first we have to find the prison book. Then we have to find where Catherine is in Riven. Hopefully she is alive. We cannot give up hope. So that was Atrus's journal. It was very, very interesting reading, and it gave us a lot of useful information. So when we return, adventurers, we will continue our explorations of this island of Riven and see what landmarks that we can explore here that might give us some hint into, the culture of Riven. Until next we meet, adventurers.